Hey everybody, today we are going to be taking a look at probably my favorite deck from 2006, and that's going to be LBS, which stands for Lugia-Blastoise-Steelix EX. Now, LBS came out around States of 2006, and the main idea with the deck is that you are going to use Blastoise to attach extra energy, and then you are going to use Holen's Cast Form to cover some awkward basic energy requirements. And so essentially what between these two cards, what it lets you do is it lets you take advantage of huge damage attacks like Lugia's Elemental Blast and Steelix's Mudslide to deal 100 damage to anything in play. Now, one of the things I enjoy about LBS is it's one of those decks that has a very low skill floor. You can be very bad at the deck and still do semi-decent with it just because of the brute strength of the deck. But it's one of those decks that has a very high skill ceiling, which means that it gives better players more options. And typically, if you're a good player, you like to have options, because with those options, you can usually create advantages to find a way to win the game. Now, LBS, whenever anyone talks about LBS from 2006, generally, the deck is going to be associated in some way with Chris Fulop. I don't think Chris Fulop was the guy who invented the deck, but he was certainly the one that pioneered most of the major innovations in the deck, both in 2006 and more currently. He's won several of the RS to PK tournaments with modified variations of LBS. And even, I would say, a majority of my list here is a combination of his 2006 list and general discussion with Chris in the last, I would say, a couple of months about the deck and things I've seen him post online and stuff like that. So I'm going to give almost the entire, basically all the credit for the deck is going to go right to Chris Fulop. There's definitely some personal preference choices in here, but I would say basically any innovation in the deck and any sort of what I would call a good choice has basically come from Chris. Now, speaking of personal preference, LBS is one of those decks where you want to run 70 cards, but you have to choose the best 60. And there are so many things that you can fit into the deck and so many different ways to play the deck that I'm not entirely convinced there's 100% right answer to it. I think there's obviously optimal and suboptimal cards, but anytime you play against an LBS deck, those lists are going to vary anywhere from, I would say, 1 to 2 cards to, like I said, all the way up to 10 different cards. And I think a lot of that is going to depend on the player's personal preference and then the meta and decks they're expecting to play against. So this is my list for 2000 or for LBS for 2006, and I'm going to break down some of the more interesting card choices as we go through it. Now, like we said here, starting off, we play 3 copies of Holen's Cast Form. I would say typical LBS decks play 3 Holen's Cast Form and then 1 Holen's Magneton. And while that does seem like a very high Holen's Cast Form count, the idea behind it is Holen Mentor, it's very easy to search out multiple cast forms. So while you do have a small chance of opening with it, the trade-off in the mid to late game that you have an out to be able to search it reliably versus needing to say like an Elms or a Celios, just being able to transceiver or Mentor to grab the cast form and grab more than one cast form at a time offsets that weakness. Now, the reason I went with 3 cast form and no Magneton is this is an idea from Chris Fulop that I'm testing, where essentially I guess what a lot of people would say the standard is 4 and then 2 Pokemon Retriever. Chris was arguing for a 3-3 split here, that third Retriever gives you a little bit more versatility with the deck. So far, I'm really liking this, but I will say I've gotten burned on this choice once playing against a Houndoom, and that Retriever lost me the game, or a cast form or a Magneton or something like that would have won me the game. So I do think there's some thought process there, but so far I'm really liking the 3-3 split versus the 4-2. Next up, you play a 2-1, 2 Blastoise. So Blastoise is one of the main strategies of the deck. We do play we play 2-1-2 line. we don't have room in the deck to play, let's say, a 3-1-3 or 3-2-3, and then it's too important to the strategy to play just a 1-1 or a 1-1-1 line of the card. As far as the Squirtle goes, Bubble, I think, is just the best Squirtle, having that chance at paralysis if need be. War Turtle is not great, but for a stage 1, not only does Water Gun offer you some solid damage, but Smash Turn in a pinch can actually be very useful to be able to switch it back to your bench. And then the Blastoise, believe it or not, is actually not the worst attacker in the world. There is certain situations where Hyper Whirlpool can be a very, very strong attack, especially with Blastoise spotting a whole 150 HP. It can be very hard for the opponent to take out. Now, I guess before I go any further, I do want to note a couple of things. You are going to see a bunch of 1-ups in this deck. And we'd always give Chris a hard time and joke with him and say, you can play more than one copy of a card in a deck. But the deck plays incredibly well for all of these single cards. And the idea is to just play a mass amount of cards and then be able to choose the right card for the right situation. And then use cards like Pokemon Retriever to get that card back if it's very good in a certain matchup or something like that. So while the deck does have some weaknesses as far as what it can prize, it's also one of those decks where you just kind of have to very quickly realize what's prized and then be able to play around it. Now, next up we play one copy of Celebi. Celebi, once again, just adds a ton of versatility to the deck. Time Reversal gets us back one of our singleton copies. Maybe that's a stadium we need. Maybe that's a supporter if our hand's not very good. Maybe that's a key attacker like a Lugia or a Steelix. Or maybe that's one of our 1-ups or something like a Switch. One of our 1-ups such as like a Giant Stump. I actually had a really good game I played a couple days ago where I kept looping Celebi EX, Giant Stump, and then Pokemon Retriever to bounce, I think, in total 6 different stadiums. So there's just really cool little plays you can make with that. Now, I also want to note, again, with Celebi, the attack isn't the worst attack in the world either in certain matchups. 30 damage and can't be hurt by EXs during your opponent's next turn. If you're playing against Medicham, for example, something like that, it can be a really solid attack. Noting that too, and I do think this comes up a little bit in 2006, just remember that Medicham EX only shuts off non-EX powers, so Medicham doesn't do anything to Blastoise. Now, one copy of Polan's Magnemite. We want a searchable energy. We play a very low energy count in the deck, so we do want a searchable energy off Mentor. And then it's going to combo with things like Make-A-Wish Jirachi, or Mew EX, Latias EX, just something where we can get that initial energy drop down. We can always bounce it on the following turn with a cast form, followed up by a energy rain to still get our Shining Star off, or Elemental Blast, or whatever else. But we just want that searchable energy. And it's also an energy we can get back with Pokemon Retriever. Generally, that's not going to be the point of Pokemon Retriever, but it is an option. Now, I play one Jirachi Make-A-Wish, and then one Jirachi Wishing Star. And I would say a lot of the LBS decks play two Make-A-Wish and then one Wishing Star. I played at 1-1. I do think mainly that's just to save room. Playing the second Make-A-Wish doesn't optimize your odds of starting with it by that much, but in the 2006 format, there can be some trainer lock, stuff like Manectrix Disconnect. Giraffe Rig is very common to shut off Wishing Star. So the Jirachi with Make-A-Wish just helps us get out our Blastoise, our Pidgeotto, our Porygon. It just gives us a few different options. If you look at it, it doesn't look like it's that great, but when you actually start playing the deck, it is pretty strong in the right situations. One Jirachi Wishing Star. I like to have that Jirachi where I can just get it off a hole on Mentor and then retreat. That's the downside of Make-A-Wish. I can't retreat my active with an energy and then play a second energy on the Jirachi to Make-A-Wish. So I do like to kind of diversify there, play a 1-1 line. One Latias Star. Shooting Star is just unbelievable, especially in Mirror. But essentially you're throwing up a non-EX to do 150 damage, which I believe in 2006 knocks out every single EX in the format. The only EX I can think of with over 150 is Salamence, and that's colorless weak, so the 150 is going to knock it out. One Lugia EX, 200 damage to anything is incredibly strong. And I do want to note that Lugia changed the format. Lugia basically made any sort of tank strategy completely impossible. And at the time, a lot of players were saying that LBS was too good of a deck. It had too many options. In reality, I don't think so, but I am going to say it really changed the format and really did a lot to gatekeep certain decks from ever being viable. Stuff like Dark Steelix was outstanding in 2005, and in 2006, it's not even playable because of this deck. One Mew EX, basically Mew EX plays as a singleton card, so think of it like a second Lugia EX, a second Latias Star, a second Steelix. There's also some situations where you want to take advantage of your opponent's cards as well. Once again, Mew on paper does not look incredibly strong in the deck, but when you start playing the deck, you do realize how many additional options it does give you. One Onyx, one Steelix. I looked at some of the different Onyxes. The 50-50 at 10, 50-50 shot at doing 10 damage really isn't worth it in a deck where that 10 damage probably doesn't matter. So there is going to be some situations where actually grabbing a basic energy out of the discard pile can be useful. And then Mud Slap, I guess, if the game is really going that bad for you. But it's neither Onyx is outstanding, but this one I think is situationally going to be better. One Steelix EX. So the idea behind Steelix EX is that you can snipe the Pidgeot, the opponent's Pidgeot, and basically take that out of the game. On top of that, Metal Charge is actually a pretty solid attack. 70 damage. The single damage counter on Steelix can be relevant, but I have noticed that I'm attacking with Metal Charge a decent amount, especially if I'm getting knockouts with it. I also want to note that it is both grass and electric resistant. The fire and fighting weakness is bad, but the grass and lightning resistance is really nice, especially against Meta Knight. Meta Knight does have some options. They can play their metal energy on certain cards and stuff like that, but like for example on benched Dragonites or on benched Metagrosses, so you can't snipe them, but they can't play it on everything, so being able to mudslide is just outstandingly good. Now, I play a 1-1-1 Pidgeot line, and I'm going to say this is pretty far against what a lot of the decks in 2006 play. I think most play 2-1-2. My argument for this is that in 2006, players generally just played Pidgeot. It was just a generally accepted fact. Hey, I play Pidgeot. Hey, you play Pidgeot. I'm going to try to get my Pidgeot out first, and then we're going to do this quick search. You know, who can quick search more? However, as players have gotten, I think, played the format more, as decks have become more and more optimized for the format, a lot of the big decks in the format take the opposite strategy. Instead of playing Pidgeot, they try to counter Pidgeot by playing the Lunatone Soul Rock combo. Dragtrode's a great example of this. Bombtar is another great example. And I think Bombtar was always a deck. Obviously, Ross got second one in 2005. But it didn't see a ton of play in 2006 until Sebastian Crema played it. He went 8-0 in Swiss and then lost in the top 32 with it. I think in a lot of 2006 games today and a lot of 2006 players, you're going to see a lot more Bombtar than you actually did in 2006. I would say it's probably one of the top 3 decks of the format, if not the best deck in the format by a slight margin. Now, the deck's not unbeatable, but it is, like I said, at the very least in the top 3. Dragtrode's another one. That's probably in the top 3 to 4 decks in the format as well. So, the playing these very, very thick Pidgeot lines was great in 2006 when everybody just generally accepted Pidgeot, but as you start playing more and more games and more decks are playing counters, playing a thicker Pidgeot line and a smaller supporter line can backfire on you really badly. So, essentially, I opted to play a smaller Pidgeot line, Mewtrick, as I'm throwing out decks. Mewtrick is another example that aims to shut off Pidgeot versus actually playing Pidgeot. But instead of playing a very thick Pidgeot line like a 2-1-2 like a lot of LBS decks do, I play a 1-1-1 line along with the 1-1 Porygon that's standard. But then I drop those extra 2 spots for additional supporters. Now, in my testing and playing against the above-mentioned decks, this does play significantly better. I have not noticed a major hit in consistency playing the 1-1-1 versus the 2-1-1 or 2-1-2. Yeah, you do prize the Pidgey sometimes, you do prize the Pidgeot sometimes, but you still do have that Porygon 2 option and a whole host of other ways to play the deck, even if you don't have Pidgeot out at that exact moment. 1-1 Porygon 2. The reason before this, and I've talked about this for RS to PK, essentially, you not only does playing the 1-1 Porygon 2 kind of diversify that Pidgeot line, where essentially you're playing Pidgeot and you're playing Porygon 2, and it is quite possible to get both out over the course of the game. There's also a lot of situations where you're going to either play admin or your opponent's going to play admin, and you're going to want to back up to a larger hand, but at the same time, you're going to want to quick search for a key card. Porygon 2 gives you both those options along with the Pidgeot. I think even in this list, you can make an argument just to play a 2-1-2 Pidgeot and not bother playing the Porygon 2. But I've played the 101 or 1-1-1 Pidgeot line and the 1-1 Porygon 2 line a lot in both 2006 decks and in the RSPK format. And so far, I'm preferring that to just like, say, a 2-1-2 Pidgeot. Just for consistency, the Porygon 2 is much easier to get out than the Pidgeot as well. Now, I do think you can make an argument to play the Tri-Attack. It's very unlikely the data retrieval is going to be impactful. The Confuse Ray can be impactful. Neither one is a great option for the deck. I do find this slightly better. It just makes me feel a little bit better about my consistency. For Rockets Admin. Now, if I had to say one mistake that I think players made in 2006, it was that very rarely did you see Rockets Admin played in a full 4 copies. And once again, the line of thinking was that I play Pidgeot, you play Pidgeot, and Rockets Admin really isn't that great of a card because you can just quick search out of it. And the more I play 2006, the more I play different kinds of decks, the more I'm liking 3 admin, 4 admin, just the higher counts of admin in general. I do think you can make an argument to go 3 admin and like a VS Seeker in this, but so far I'm liking the 4 admin for a couple of reasons. One, we play Steelix EX, so we do have that option to snipe the Pidgeot, take that out of the game, and then we have access to our Pidgeot while we can also disrupt the opponent with Rockets Admin. On top of that, the deck does outstanding at playing a 5-prize game. It's very common that the opponent's going to knock out something like, let's say, a Jirachi or even a Pidgeot, and then 2 EXs, say a Lugia EX and a Mew EX, and then be down to 1 prize. We can Rockets Admin them to 1 prize, and then put that final stand-up, whatever that might be. Maybe that's a Steelix, maybe that's another Lugia, whatever it is, but we can always try to put them off of the cards they need. Even when we're just trading, like let's say they take a Jirachi prize, we send up a Lugia, knock something out, they knock out the Lugia, we're able to make a counterplay, but we're going to put them at 3 cards before we do that, just to try to put them off the out to answer the Lugia. So I think situations like that are very common. So far, I'm loving the 4 Rockets Admin in the deck. I think 2 is way too low, and I strongly disagree with that in this deck. Next up, we play 4 Holons Transceivers. Now, Jake, I love your program, but it doesn't put my Holon Transceiver in front of my Holon supporters, which small complaint from me there. But other than that, I'm actually loving the Pokegear app. It makes doing these deck profiles so much easier. But I play 4 Holon Transceiver, 2 Holon Mentor, and then 1 Adventurer, 1 Scientist. Pretty standard Holon package. I think you can make a strong argument to play a 3rd Mentor in the deck. It's just so strong. Mainly, I cut it just for room. Fulop also argued, and I think he played it at the time, 3 Transceiver, 3 Mentor, and that was to help play around Houndoom. A majority of the time, you're just going to Transceiver for Mentor anyways, so this was kind of, I guess, trying to be helpful against Trainer Lock or, like, say, a Disconnect. Personally, I think the extra Transceiver just gives a little bit more utility, so I do think this is the correct choice. 2 Elms. Once again, we have Mentor to search out a lot of the basics. The Elms is going to be able to grab the Blastoise EX, which the Mentor would not be able, or the Steelix would not be able to do. 2 Steven's Advice. I would love a third copy in the deck. I've also thought about splitting the admins with it, going 3 admin, 3 Stevens. Players tend to fill their bench a lot in this format, especially players that play the Lunatone Soul Rock combo we talked about, and Steven's Advice is incredibly strong against those type of decks. 1 Celio's Network. This is just kind of splitting the Professor Elm's training method line. The Celios and the Elms in many situations can search out the same cards, but the Celio's Network does give us access to basics such as the Latias Star or the Jirachi. I think there's a lot of different arguments you could play in those 3 spots as far as how you want to split them, but I do think the 2 Elms and 1 Celios is the correct call for that. 4 copies of Rare Candy. This seems a little unusual, playing only a 2/1/2 Blastoise and a 1/1/1 Pidgeot. I do think the 4th candy made a little bit more sense when you played the thicker Pidgeot line, but at the exact same time, too, you want to hit those evolutions early, so playing that extra Rare Candy spot is very useful. You can always pitch any wasted Rare Candies to cards like Mentor, Scientist, or Adventurer. 3 copies of Pokemon Retriever. Like we talked about, playing 3 copies is, I think I like it better than the 4-2 split. You, in many situations, can just pitch Retriever and not really think about it. If you need Retriever just to get back a single cast form, you can do that. Don't always feel like you have to shuffle like 3 cast form back in, or a Lugia EX and 2 cast form. If you need just a single card, just grab the single card. You play 3 copies of Retriever along with the Celebi EX. You have a lot of utility, a lot of different ways to get it back. So don't feel like it's an automatic shuffle into the deck. In many situations, you're just going to grab the single card back to the hand. 1 Swoop Teleporter. I did not think I was going to like this in the deck, but I ended up really, really, really liking it. There's a lot of different things that you can do. Not only does this help if you unfortunately open with Holen's cast form, it gives you access to a first turn Jirachi or a Wishing Star Make-A-Wish. There's just so many different options with the deck. I actually had a game I played like a month ago where essentially I had a Porygon on the bench. My opponent knocked out my active Steelix. I retrieved the Onix, the Steelix, and something else back into the deck, swooped the Porygon for the Onix, evolved into Steelix, and then ended up winning the game that turn off the Steelix. So, well, that seems like, well, Jay, that's kind of a random situation of cards where it just kind of seemed to work out for you. Yes, but those situations seem to pop up quite a lot. So far I'm really liking Swoop. Another commonly played card in the deck is POW. I think POW is outstanding. I cut it just for space in this list. But I don't have anything really too bad to say about POW. It's incredibly good in the mirror, so if you think you're going to play against a lot of mirrors, you're going to want to play POW because you are going to POW Blastoise EX. Or ideally, the ideal situation mirrors, you snipe the Lugia, or you snipe the Pidgeot with Steelix, they Lugia your Steelix, and then you POW Lugia the Blastoise. So essentially, you take a single prize, they take 2 prizes, and then you're able to still POW and take 2 prizes and have control of the game. Ideally, follow that up with an admin. Once again, seems like a crazy situation of cards, but it's a lot more common than you think. I actually did it in my first round of Worlds, and I won a game against the Germany national champion at the time doing that. So, small humble brag there, but those situations do come up quite a lot. 3 Power Tree. Not only does Power Tree give you a stadium for the deck, something to counter Desert Ruin, something to counter Curse Stone, it also lets you get back basic energy cards. Remember that the Holen's engine count as Pokemon in the discard pile and not special energy cards, so they don't affect Power Tree here. 1 Giant Stump. The idea behind Giant Stump is just that you can get damaged EXs off your board, especially in this format. Like I said, Desert Ruins, Curse Stone are very common. Giant Stump can completely change a game around. It's a great one-of. There's also some ways you can cycle Celebi with it. Like I talked about before, those situations do come up a lot. And then 7 Water Energy. Once again, this seems very low, but as soon as you hit a single copy of it, it's basically live, and almost all of your attacks in the deck only require a single Water Energy along with a Holen's cast form to work. So 7 has been playing very well for me. I have even, Chris Fulop even promotes doing 6 and a Chimento to get back energy. I am not as much on board with that. I think that's okay, but I do like the 7 energy over the whole, or the Chimento has not done enough for me to really justify it. So that is going to be LBS. One of the last things I do want to talk about with this deck is over the course of the video and while playing the deck, there's going to be a lot of situations that come up. And like I've talked about, like the POW or different Rockets admin situations. And you can sit there and you can go, hey, yeah, that's the situation where this card is really good, but that seems like a pretty far-fetched or a pretty random situation. The problem is, though, with that line of thinking is that there is so many of those situations in the deck because of the combination of cards you play that those incredibly random situations you don't think will ever come up every single game. Now, it's not going to be the same situations every single game, but you're going to have a lot of, oh wow, this card was the perfect card in this situation, even though that's completely unlikely that this situation would happen. So just be open to not only that line of thinking, but also be open to just looking for those situations, looking for those outs. And there's a lot of times with this deck where you have to, it feels a little bit like playing chess where you have to constantly be thinking a couple moves ahead and always be thinking, how do I win this game? Because there's a lot of situations where the game is going to look horrible and you have zero chance of winning. But there is, not obviously not always, but there is usually a line of play in there that gives you a shot at winning. And it's being able to look for those lines of play and finding those lines of play that I think not only separates the good LBS players from the bad LBS players, but also makes the deck really fun and enjoyable to play. So, like I said, this is one of my favorite decks for 2006. I played it at Worlds that year. Absolutely loved it. I do, and like I said, I hope from this video you get a little bit better understanding of LBS, what a good LBS deck looks like, and then how to play the deck. But if you're not familiar with this deck and you like playing 2006, I really suggest that you pick it up at the very least to become familiar with it and know how to play against it. But I hope you enjoyed the video. If you have not, if you enjoyed it, please like the video, subscribe to the channel, and of course, I hope to see you in the next video.